Chapter 18. Then David numbered the men who were with him, and placed over them chiefs of thousands and chiefs of hundreds. And David sent 1/3 of the men under the command of Joab, 1/3 under the command of Joab's brother Abishai the son of Zeruiah, and 1/3 under the command of Ittai the Gittite. The king then said to the men,
I will also go out with you.
But they said,
You must not go out, for if we flee, they would not care about us. And if half of us would die, they would not care about us, because you are worth 10,000 of us. Therefore, it would be better if you would send us help from the city.
The king said to them,
Whatever seems best to you, I will do.
So the king stood next to the city gate, and all the men went out by hundreds and by thousands. Then the king gave Joab and Abishai and Ittai this order,
Deal gently with the young man Absalom, for my sake.
All the men heard it when the king gave all the chiefs the order about Absalom. The men went out to the field to meet Israel, and the battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. There the people of Israel were defeated by the servants of David, and a great slaughter took place on that day, 20,000 men. The battle spread through the whole region. Furthermore, the forest devoured more of the people than the sword did on that day. Absalom eventually found himself facing the servants of David. Absalom was riding on a mule, and the mule went under the thick branches of a large tree, and his head got entangled in the big tree, so that he was suspended in mid-air, while the mule he had been riding kept going. Then someone saw it and told Joab,
Look, I have seen Absalom hanging in a big tree.
Joab replied to the man who told him,
If you saw it, why did you not strike him down to the ground on the spot? Then I would have gladly given you 10 pieces of silver and a belt.
But the man said to Joab,
Even if I were handed 1,000 pieces of silver, I could not lift my hand against the king's son. For we heard the king order you and Abishai and Ittai, whoever you are, watch over the young man Absalom. If I had disobeyed and taken his life, it could never have remained hidden from the king, and you would not have protected me.
To this Joab said,
I am not going to waste any more time with you.
So he took 3 spikes in his hand and drove them through the heart of Absalom while he was still alive in the midst of the big tree. Then 10 attendants who carried Joab's weapons came and struck Absalom until he was dead. Joab now blew the horn, and the men returned from chasing after Israel. Joab called for them to halt. They took Absalom and threw him into a big pit in the forest, and piled up over him a very big heap of stones, and all Israel fled to their homes. Now Absalom, while he was alive, had taken and set up for himself a pillar in the valley of the king, for he said, I have no son to preserve the memory of my name. So he named the pillar after himself, and it is called Absalom's monument to this day. Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said,
Let me run, please, and break the news to the king, for Jehovah has given him justice by freeing him from his enemies.
But Joab said to him,
You will not be a bearer of news this day. You may break the news on another day, but today you will not break the news, because the king's own son has died.
Then Joab said to a Cushite,
Go, tell the king what you have seen.
At that the Cushite bowed to Joab and ran off. Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said once again to Joab,
Whatever happens, please let me also run behind the Cushite.
However, Joab said,
Why should you run, my son, when there is no news for you to tell?
Still he said,
Whatever happens, let me run.
So Joab said to him,
Run.
And Ahimaaz ran by the way of the district of the Jordan, and he eventually overtook the Cushite. Now David was sitting between the 2 city gates, and the watchman went up to the roof of the gate by the wall. He looked up and saw a man running by himself. So the watchman called out and told the king. The king said,
If he is by himself, he has news to tell.
As he came steadily nearer, the watchman saw another man running. The watchman then called to the gatekeeper.
"Look, another man, running by himself."
The king said,
This one is also bringing news.
The watchman said,
"I can see that the first man runs like Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok."
So the king said,
He is a good man, and he comes with good news.
Ahimaaz then called out to the king.
All is well.
With that he bowed to the king with his face to the ground. Then he said,
May Jehovah your God be praised, who has surrendered the men who rebelled against my lord the king.
However, the king said,
Is everything all right with the young man Absalom?
To this Ahimaaz said,
I saw the great commotion when Joab sent the king's servant and your servant, but I did not know what it was.
So the king said,
Step aside. Stand here.
At that he stepped aside and stood there. Then the Cushite arrived, and the Cushite said,
Let my lord the king accept this news. Today Jehovah has brought justice by freeing you from the hand of all those who rebelled against you.
But the king said to the Cushite,
Is everything all right with the young man Absalom?
To this the Cushite said,
May all the enemies of my lord the king, and all those who rebelled against you to harm you, become like the young man.
This disturbed the king, and he went up to the roof chamber over the gateway and wept, saying as he walked,
My son Absalom, my son Absalom. If only I had died instead of you, Absalom, my son, my son.
Chapter 19. It was reported to Joab,
The king is weeping and mourning for Absalom.
So the victory on that day was turned into mourning for all the people, because they heard that the king was grieving over his son. The people quietly returned to the city that day like people who are ashamed because they fled in the battle. The king covered his face and kept crying out with a loud voice,
My son Absalom, Absalom, my son, my son.
Then Joab went in to the king at the house and said,
Today you have put to shame all your servants who this day saved your life and the lives of your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your concubines. You love those who hate you and hate those who love you. For you have made it clear today that your chiefs and servants mean nothing to you. Because I am sure that if only Absalom were alive today and the rest of us were dead, it would be all right with you. Now get up, go out and reassure your servants, because by Jehovah I swear that if you do not go out, not a man will remain with you tonight. This will be worse for you than all the injury that has come upon you from your youth until now.
So the king rose up and sat in the city gate, and all the people were informed.
Now the king is sitting in the gate.
Then all the people came before the king. But Israel had fled, each to his home. All the people in all the tribes of Israel were disputing, saying,
The king saved us from our enemies, and he rescued us from the Philistines, but now he has fled the land because of Absalom.
And Absalom, whom we anointed over us, has died in the battle.
So now why are you doing nothing to bring the king back?
King David sent this message to Zadok and Abiathar the priests.
Speak to the elders of Judah, saying, Why should you be the last ones to bring the king back to his house, when the word of all Israel has come to the king at his house? You are my brothers. You are my own bone and flesh. Why should you be the last ones to bring the king back? And you should say to Amasa, Are you not my own bone and flesh? So may God do to me and add to it if you will not become my army chief from now on instead of Joab.
So he won over the hearts of all the men of Judah as one man, and they sent word to the king,
Come back, you and all your servants.
The king started back and reached the Jordan. And the people of Judah came to Gilgal to meet the king and to escort him across the Jordan. Then Shimei the son of Gera, the Benjaminite from Bahurim, hurried down with the men of Judah to meet King David, and there were 1,000 men from Benjamin with him. Also Ziba, the attendant of the house of Saul, with his 15 sons and 20 servants, rushed down to the Jordan ahead of the king. He crossed the ford to bring the king's household across, and to do whatever he desired. But Shimei the son of Gera fell down before the king when he was about to cross the Jordan. He said to the king,
"Do not let my lord hold me guilty, and do not remember the wrong your servant did on the day that my lord the king went out of Jerusalem. May the king not take it to heart, for your servant well knows that I have sinned. So today I have been the first of all the house of Joseph to come down to meet my lord the king."
At once Abishai the son of Zeruiah said,
Should not Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed the anointed of Jehovah?
But David said,
What does this have to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah, that you should act against me today? Should anyone be put to death today in Israel? For do I not know that today I am king over Israel?
Then the king said to Shimei,
You will not die.
And the king gave him his oath. Mephibosheth, the grandson of Saul, also came down to meet the king. He had not cared for his feet, or trimmed his mustache, or washed his garments from the day the king left until the day he returned in peace. When he came to Jerusalem to meet the king said to him,
Why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth?
To this he said,
My lord the king, my servant tricked me. For your servant had said, Let me get my donkey saddled, so that I may ride on it and go with the king. For your servant is crippled. But he slandered your servant to my lord the king. However, my lord the king is like an angel of the true God. So do whatever seems good to you. All the household of my father could have been doomed to death by my lord the king. And yet you placed your servant among those eating at your table. So what right do I have to cry out further to the king?
However, the king said to him,
Why keep on speaking like this? I have decided that you and Ziba should share the field.
At this Mephibosheth said to the king,
Let him take it all, now that my lord the king has come to his house in peace.
Then Barzillai the Gileadite came down from Rogelim to the Jordan to escort the king to the Jordan. Barzillai was very old, 80 years of age, and he supplied the king with food while he was staying in Mahanaim, for he was a very wealthy man. So the king said to Barzillai,
Cross over with me, and I will supply you with food in Jerusalem.
But Barzillai said to the king,
How many days of my life are left that I should go up with the king to Jerusalem? I am 80 years old today. Can I discern between good and bad? Can I, your servant, taste what I eat and drink? Can I still listen to the voice of male and female singers? So why should your servant be an added burden to my lord the king? It is enough that your servant could bring the king to the Jordan. Why should the king repay me with this reward? Let your servant return, please, and let me die in my city, near the burial place of my father and my mother. But here is your servant Kimham. Let him cross over with my lord the king, and you may do for him what seems good to you.
So the king said,
Kimham will go across with me, and I will do for him what seems good to you. Whatever you ask of me, I will do for you.
All the people now began to cross the Jordan. And when the king crossed, the king kissed Barzillai and blessed him, and Barzillai returned home. When the king went across to Gilgal, Kimham crossed with him. All the people of Judah and half the people of Israel brought the king across. Then all the men of Israel approached the king and said to him,
Why did our brothers, the men of Judah, steal you away, and bring the king and his household over the Jordan, along with all of David's men.
All the men of Judah answered the men of Israel,
Because the king is related to us. Why are you angry over this? Have we eaten anything at the king's expense? Or has a gift been given to us?
However, the men of Israel answered the men of Judah,
We have 10 parts in the king, so that we have a greater claim in David than you have. Why then have you treated us with contempt? Should we not have been first to bring our king back?
But the word of the men of Judah prevailed over that of the men of Israel.